Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Frank Turek.
So on September 10th, 2025, we were just flipping hats just a few minutes before Charlie was going to answer some questions. Maybe we can bring the slides up. And then 12 minutes later, he was dead. Was there any purpose to his life? What was it? This is the interactive portion of the program. What was the purpose of Charlie Kirk's life? The gospel. How do we know the gospel? What is the gospel? Truth. A lot of people say there is no truth. When they say that, you ought to ask them, is that true? What is the purpose of life? 31 years old. A waste? What is the purpose of life? Well, let me tell you what happened 2 nights before September 10th. I was in Phoenix because this past summer, Charlie was really working hard to get ready for this college tour, and he asked me to kind of help him get better at answering some questions related to Christianity, Christian apologetics, evidence for the faith, that kind of thing. Now, it can be really hard to mentor somebody who's smarter than you, but not with Charlie, because the only thing that exceeded his intellect was his humility. And the few things that I knew that he didn't know, he wanted to know. And so we met in Phoenix on 4 occasions this past summer in order to sharpen one another. And so in early August, I was out there with him, and he said, hey, can you come back in a month just before the tour starts? I'm going to be coming back from Japan, and if you can be here the day I get back, we'll spend a couple of days, we'll get ready. I said, sure. So we both landed in Phoenix on that Sunday before. The next day, Monday, we met, and we went through some questions and tried to sharpen one another. And then, as our custom was, after Charlie and Erica put the kids to bed, Charlie and I would go on these long walks through his neighborhood. We'd always have a 300-pound armed bodyguard behind us. But we'd walk and talk about any issue he wanted to talk about. And there were 3 issues on his mind that night, September 8th, 2025. One of the issues we talked about was the family, because he was trying to figure out how could he get his generation to embrace marriage and the family again. Because the evidence showed that while the men were interested in getting married and having a family, the women really weren't. And he wanted to figure out a way to get them to embrace the family. And we didn't really come up with an answer that night. Why are the women going to listen to him, he thought. And every woman that he knew who was speaking on the issue was already a career woman. So the audience might see the mild contradiction. This woman is telling me I ought to stay home and take care of kids when she's out on tour, telling kids or telling women that. That seemed to be a bit of a contradiction. However, a couple of days later, the answer, at least the partial answer, may have arisen, because we saw Erica Kirk rise out of the ashes and stand strong as a mom and now a widow. And after these demonic attacks on her ultimately are suppressed, I think people are going to turn more to Erica and realize that she is that strong woman that moms can look to. And hopefully she can encourage them, as Charlie wanted to get married and have a family. By the way, I need to say this now because I'm really tired of the attacks on Erica and TPUSA. Do you know how Jesus and the apostles describe Satan? A murderer, a liar, an accuser, and a slanderer who seeks to steal, kill, and destroy. We had a murder. What have we had since? Lies, accusations, and slander seeking to kill, steal, and destroy. People say they don't believe in the demonic. How could it be more obvious? Satan only attacks successful, effective people for the kingdom. Charlie was enormously successful. TPUSA is enormously successful, and Erica is enormously successful. People don't know that Erica was established before she ever met Charlie. She was already the CEO of 2 companies before she met Charlie. So she's very capable. But please pray for her and pray that these attacks are exposed. By the way, if we were in the Old Testament economy, the Old Testament covenant, you know what God says? If you abuse a widow or the fatherless, this is Exodus 22:22, you can look it up. God says, I will hunt you down with the sword and put you to death. Deuteronomy 19 says if you accuse somebody of a crime, falsely accuse that person, and you're found out, you get the penalty of the crime. You accuse somebody of murder, you're the one executed. That would shut down the internet, wouldn't it? So anyway, we talked about the family for a good part of that walk. The second topic we talked about was politics and government. And as you know, Charlie, being concerned about politics, was really concerned about Islam. Because Islam, practiced as it is in other countries, is not compatible with the United States Constitution. It's not compatible with Christianity. In fact, the rights that we have as Americans enshrined in our Constitution, say just the First Amendment rights, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, those go away in Islamic countries. You don't have those freedoms. You say, Frank, don't Muslims have the freedom to practice their own religion? Yes, up to the point they want to take those other freedoms away. The First Amendment is not a self-defeating amendment. It doesn't give one religion the right to take the freedoms of religion away from every other religion. That would be self-contradictory. And so Charlie rightfully was sounding the alarm on Islam. And by the way, let me mention one other thing that we talked about that night. Do you know there's no such thing as Islamophobia? Why? Because Islam is not a race. There are Muslims from every ethnic group and every racial group. Islam is a political religious ideology. And it's wise to oppose an ideology that wants to take your freedom to preach and live the gospel away. So we talked about how bogus this term is, and when you hear it, you need to call it out. There's no such thing as Islamophobia, because it's not a race, it's an ideology. The third issue we talked about that night was the evidence for the resurrection. Now, as I think about this in retrospect, I wasn't bringing these topics up, Charlie was. Do you know what Charlie was talking about? Family, government, church, resurrection. He was talking about the 3 institutions that God established. God established the family first, then government, then the church. Charlie was a big picture thinker. He knew what the main issues were. And so he was concerned about the big issues. If we lose the family, nothing else matters. If we lose the government's going to hurt our ability to live as a family and live as Christians. And of course, if we lose the gospel, we've lost everything. So Charlie knew what we needed to discuss. Now, that night, we talked a lot about the evidence for the resurrection. First of all, in order for there to be a resurrection, there has to be a God, and miracles must be possible. So one thing we talked about that night was the evidence that even atheists are admitting that the universe, space-time and matter, had a beginning out of nothing. Even Stephen Hawking famously said, an atheist, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, I know some of you Christians in here are going, Frank, we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that atheists are admitting the evidence for it. Now, they don't think it's God that created the universe, but what else could it be? Ladies and gentlemen, if space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing, what could have caused that? Only something outside of space-time and matter, because space-time and matter didn't exist, right? So it must be something spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the cause would also have to be intelligent, to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. Well, no, you don't think of Jesus yet. Why? Because this cause could be Allah at this point. No, you don't. The Big Bang doesn't tell you, the creation event doesn't tell you who the creator is. It could be Jesus. It could be the God of the Bible, but you need more evidence. All we're saying now is we have 6 attributes for a being that could be the God of the Bible. How do we discover if it is the God of the Bible that created the universe? We have to look at the evidence for the resurrection. And we have several chapters in our book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist about that. But let me just give you one insight here into this. A lot of people won't believe what the New Testament documents say about the resurrection, because these people were Christians. Now, they'll say you can only trust the non-Christian sources. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you ought to realize how stupid that is. First of all, I know it's going to sound a little odd. There are no Christian sources in the Bible. They're all Jewish. They all started as Jews. Yeah, they became Christians. The question is, why did they become Christians? Why did they abandon their long-held religious beliefs that they were God's chosen people, and then suffer excommunication from the synagogue, and then get beaten, tortured, and killed if it wasn't true? Why would they do this? They wouldn't. They didn't even believe a guy could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. They didn't believe one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time and save the whole world. They thought everyone would rise from the dead at the end of time, because that's what Daniel and Isaiah say. But they didn't think one guy would show up. So here they are. They put their lives on the line, dying for something they knew was true. This is not like Islam, where you die for something you think is true, but you don't know. These people were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead. They saw him, they touched him, they ate with him. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. That's right. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. You say, well, I can't believe in a resurrection. Resurrections are not possible. Newsflash, ladies and gentlemen. What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, including the resurrection. Because if God can create the whole show out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants? It's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course he can. Well, that's exactly what we have. Atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. So God can certainly resurrect Jesus from the dead if he wants to. Now, since Jesus did walk out of the tomb 1,993 years ago this past Sunday, then we can go back and say the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,993 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. And if that's the case, there's hope. There's hope for Charlie. There's hope for you. There's hope for me. Now, let's go back to September 10th. We're driving into the venue, and Charlie gets a text from somebody on the team who's already at the venue, and it shows thousands of people, as you can see on the screen. There were thousands all around us. They were above us. They were everywhere. And as we're looking at the video coming in, I literally said to him, I said, Charlie, I don't like this place. There's too many buildings. But he just shrugged it off because he was brave, and he knew that if you're going to reach people, you can't be completely secure. You have to make yourself somewhat vulnerable. And so we went in there, he greeted everybody. The crowd is roaring as we come up to the 50 yards away from where he was going to sit. After he greets everyone, they're all roaring. He looks at me and he goes, "Welcome to the big leagues." Because I do campus events. I'll get a few hundred. Charlie's getting a few thousand. And they're not there to hear him give a speech. They're there for a Q&A. It was like a Trump rally times 10 with no Trump. First question is about Mormonism. We had prepped that in the car. We're in Utah. Of course we're going to get a question on Mormonism. Next question is about trans violence. Asked by a kid by the name of Hunter. 2 weeks ago, I went back there and did an event at Utah Valley University, and the kid that was asking him the question was there when he got shot. He didn't agree with Charlie. He was pressing him on Charlie. He was pressing Charlie. He was saying, "You think that trans people shouldn't have guns, apparently. Why do you say that?" It's ironic that question was being asked when Charlie was gunned down allegedly by a man in a trans relationship. So I hear the pop. I'm only 25 feet off to his right, and I see Charlie go down. I take a step toward him, but his security team's on him already. And then I, like almost everybody else, ducked. There's got to be more shots coming. Just for maybe a second, I don't know. And they take him off the other side of the tent. So I run behind the tent and get in the back of the SUV. Trying to stop the bleeding. He's not looking at me. He's looking right past me into eternity. He's already gone. We get him to the hospital, bring him into the emergency room. Where is everybody? It's like, nobody there. Don't you know we're coming? About 2 minutes later, they show up. They get a heartbeat. Rick and I are praying out loud. We were praying out loud the whole way. Maybe there's hope. Maybe they can revive him. Tried CPR in the car. I didn't get anywhere with that. They take him into the operating room. By this time, Mikey shows up. Mikey McCoy, his 23-year-old chief of staff who was mature beyond his years. He's walking into the emergency room talking to J.D. Vance. He's already sent a plane to get Erica. We're standing out in the hallway after the nurses were great. They cleaned us up and tried to minister to us. And then we're all standing out in the hall. The doctor comes out and says, "He's dead." No, we're sorry. We tried everything. Just, he's dead. With all the tenderness of a brick. "I need to talk to Erica," he says. "I need to tell her before she hears it in the media." Mikey's on the phone going, "What do I do? I can't get that out of my head. He's dead." Where's Charlie now? How do you know? Absent from the body, present with the Lord. If the scriptures are true, Charlie was with the Lord that second the bullet hit him. In fact, the surgeon later told us if he was shot in the operating room, we couldn't have saved him. That was the only comforting part of this, is that Charlie experienced no pain. But do you know that at some point, within decades, maybe sooner, someone is going to say of you, "He's dead. She's dead." It's going to happen. Where are you going to wind up? What was the purpose of his life? What is the purpose of your life? What is it? Jesus tells us in John 17:3, when he's praying for us, he says, "Now this is eternal life, that they," meaning us, he's praying for us, "may know you, God the Father, and Jesus Christ whom you've sent." And then when you add the Great Commission from Matthew 28, you realize the purpose of life is to know God through Jesus and to make him known. To know God through Jesus, and not just intellectually, but personally, relationally. Because there's a difference between belief that and belief in. James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, man, you guys are sharp tonight. James says even the demons believe that God exists. Do you know that if God exists, and he does, and if demons exist, and they do, just look at the news, Do you know that demons know that God exists better than we do? But they don't trust in him. They don't want to trust in him. God is not going to force any of us into heaven against our will. If you don't want Jesus now, you're not going to want him in eternity. It was a great tragedy that occurred on September 10th. A lot of good has come from it, including the Make Heaven Crowded tour, including more than 100 million people watching a memorial service where the gospel was preached and Jesus was talked about from the president on down. Over 1 billion people have seen that since then. A lot of good has come from this. So God can bring good from evil. However, he can only do it for you with your consent, because he's not going to force you into his presence against your will. This was a great tragedy, but you know what an equally great tragedy is? Living 80 plus years and doing nothing for the Lord. Charlie did more in his 31-year life than any 10,000 people I know do in 80. So the question is tonight, many of you in here are probably Christians. Maybe there's a few that aren't. The question is, what are you going to do with your life? Because Christianity is not just fire insurance. You don't just accept Jesus and then live however you want. God has a mission for you. Charlie knew what that mission was. It was to build a family. It was to be salt and light in government. And it was to tell people about Jesus and the resurrection and the fact that there is hope. There's hope for all of us.